Hi, everybody. Obviously, I have been selected to be a staff member to share more with you about being an active ally, specifically for the LGBTQIA plus community today. And so hopefully I'll be able to share with you quite a bit of information that will give you either some information you knew about or some information you didn't to allow for you to be a better ally to this community. Like I said, I'm Jessica Day. My pronouns are she, hers, and hers. I joined Stetson in 2014. I'm the Associate Director for Residential Education and Community Programs. I supervise our resident assistants that are on campus in our halls with the students every day. I am also a Stetson Safe Zone facilitator. So my job is to help put on different experiences around campus to allow for us to build allyship here. And so I've kind of adapted some content here to allow for you to get a taste of what Safe Zone is since we're in a virtual environment, but then also gain some other information that you can apply starting today. So hopefully, if you have questions as we go, please, I'm welcoming them. I'm going to ask you some questions. So let's use the chat box to connect with each other back and forth. I do love a good interactive environment, and we'll get started. Okay, so why Safe Zone? So just to give you a little context and background, Safe Zone is a program that we have here at Stetson, and a lot of universities have them in order to help create a culture where everyone understands this community more. The LGBTQIA community is important to help make sure we increase our comfort around issues that impact them, and also awareness of what's going on in our world, not just today, but in the past, because all of that helps us be better individuals to each other. It's also created to help create a safer environment for our students who identify with this community while they're here on campus. I know one of the things that we do with Safe Zone is we make sure all of our RAs go through this program because they're working with students who have in some way, shape, or form identified or not yet identified with this community, and we want to make sure everybody feels welcomed. A little delay here. So my job is to talk about being an ally. And so ally for some people is a noun. And to me, in this particular case, it really is a verb. And so there's a couple of things that I'd like to help us shape how we look at ally today. The first thing is rather than developing some stiff set of requirements, what I really want you to do is walk away with maybe some 4 elements to think about how you will apply them in your own life. And so allies, starting with learn, are people who recognize that they don't know it all. You might not have an understanding of what every LGBT, what each of the letters mean. Or you might come in with tons of knowledge, and so might have different identities that show up, and that is important to be able to understand and grow as you move forward, right? So allies want to learn. Addressing barriers. So we all have different roadblocks that have started from when we were younger. The story that we were told as individuals or babies, all the way up until now. And so being open to the roadblocks of listening to the stories we were told and the stories we will create as we move forward is extremely important for us to be actively supportive of the people in the LGBTQ community. But you're willing to take on the challenge, and that's really cool about being able to address barriers. So allies address barriers. So you can be super gay and super proud, right? It might mean that you show public support by putting on a rainbow flag outside of your business, or you might choose to participate in a pride parade. But it also could mean supporting this community in personal ways. And so that can be different in the way that you use your language, in the conversations you choose to have with your friends and your peers, or even some of the signals that you choose to send when people say things to you. So all of that looks different because allies are people who support people in different ways. And then the last one, be diverse. So allies are people who know that there's no single way to be an ally. You get to adopt right today how you want to choose to be an ally. And know that ally could be different for each of us. And that's okay, because allies are diverse. So those are my 4 elements that hopefully we'll hit on today. So here's my first question of the day. So I want to talk a little bit about vocabulary because I don't want to assume everybody has the same knowledge. So I've pulled some vocabulary words that I think are common to some people and some vocabulary that might be new. If you can tell me maybe what's the newest to you LGBTQIA word that you've heard maybe in the last couple of months. Go ahead and put that in the chat if you have one. Newest word to you. Well, how about I get it started? Oh, my words are all messed up here. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. NB. I haven't even heard of NB. I want to explore that. That's a good one. Okay. So you will know, and something that we should all know here today is that words are starting to grow on a spectrum. Oh, thank you so much. Yes. What I am, passing, that's good. It's actually in my presentation. We'll talk about that too, Alex. So one of the things that I find is that because we are still learning and growing so much about what the culture of LGBTQIA is, there are so many new words and so many new variants that are being created as students. Young people are developing truly who they are, and even older people, I should say. And so there are some structural form words that I think can help us build our foundation. But of course, there's new words, even words I haven't heard today yet. And so that is where a lot of this learning comes into play. So a couple of things that I want to kind of just make sure we're on the same page for. So gender identity. So gender identity is one's gender that they label themselves. So this is not male or female. This is not boy or girl. Gender identity is what I might call my own self, what I align to. And so how I want to be identified. Okay, gender expression. Gender expression is kind of like what you would think it would be when you think about express, right? Your clothing, how you show up, what you wear, your social behavior, and the factors you might show up with. And these all have spectrums. So identity has a spectrum when you think male to female. Expression has a masculine to feminine. You might think on the same track. You don't always have to be all masculine or all feminine. Sexual attraction. Many of us are familiar with this word, but this is your capacity to engage with somebody physically or intimately. And so that might be who you are physically and sexually attracted to. And then romantic attraction, not assuming that your sexual and your romantic attraction are the same, aligns with who you want to be intimate with. So who you date, who you're married to, can help identify who your romantic attraction is. And so one of the things that I find is it's really good and helpful for us to start defining some of our gender identity. So these 3 words I think are great examples. Help you zone in on what it means for particularly each individual sex. So a gender description for someone's sex assigned at birth and gender identity correspond in the same way. So cisgender. So if I was born male, and that's actually a bad experience because I was born female. So if I was born female and I identify as female for my gender identity, I'm cisgender. So I'm a cisgender female. If I was born female, but now have transitioned and I don't identify with that internally as female, but maybe I identify as male, I would be considered a transgender male. So transgender means your gender description for what you were assigned at sex at birth is not the same as your gender identity. Look at me messing up all the words. And then agender. This is the one that I love and I'm still growing to understand a lot more, is a person with no connection to their traditional system of gender. So we create these binaries, cis and trans, right? It has to be on one side or on the other. But agender says that there doesn't have to be this connection to cis or trans. You have the ability to have no connection to either of those. You don't have to be in the concepts of being a male or a female. You can just be yourselves and exist without a gender, which you'll find quite a bit of our young individuals are starting to identify more. Let's see here. Okay, so some of these are common words that you might have heard before. Gay and lesbian are common, I think, history, language words when it comes to LGBT. So gay is somebody who has attraction to what you traditionally see male to male, but this actually can identify as the same gender. So if a female was identified as attracted to a female, then they would also potentially be identified as gay. But we do have a common word that's used for that as well as lesbian. And so women who primarily have a romantic or sexually, emotionally attraction to other women could be called a lesbian. Then bisexual. Bisexual is a term used for a person who has experiences with both men and women. And this doesn't always mean attraction. It doesn't always mean that it has to be at the same time. I think that's an assumption that's created nowadays, is that bisexual means that you potentially could be dating a male and a female at the same time, and that's not always true. It could also mean that you just are interested in a man at that time, and then a couple, maybe you start a new relationship and you might be interested in a different sex at that time. Asexual. Asexual is experiencing little or no sexual attraction to others, or a lack of interest in sexual relationship. And I'm sorry that this is all squished here. So an asexual person does not have any sexual connection with another individual. And so they, for them, that's what would be their identity. Pansexual, which is what I identify as, is a person who experiences sexual, romantic, physical, spiritual attraction to all genders. And so it doesn't matter what gender identity or expression that person has, because they can have an attraction, a sexual attraction or romantic attraction with any individual based off of their gender identities. And then aromantic is one that I wanted to kind of slide in there because I think asexual and aromantic sometimes get confused, but this is specifically related to romantic attraction. So when somebody might actually have sex with others, they might partake in some emotional connection, but they don't actually have romantic connection, maybe little romantic connection or relationships with others. So it kind of gives you a little sense of the difference when you look at sexual and romantic. When you look at all of these words, all of them have to do based off of those original words I talked about: gender identity, gender attraction. So some new words that might not always be in everybody's vocabulary: androgyny or androgynous, if you've heard it before. So that's gender expression where elements could be both masculine and feminine. I find that a lot of androgyny is usually seen in expression, so what people are wearing, how they show up, what their hair might look like. We might assign a mixed, you might not identify them as male or female when you first meet them. Gender nonconforming. This is a common term used, I think, now, especially in our youth population, is a gender expression that is a descriptor where there isn't really a strong gender presentation that's female or male. So you might actually see somebody who is a woman who may look masculine, or a male that may look more feminine, but it's not your traditional setup. So they don't conform to the expectations that we have in society. Fluidity, generally used to connect with another word. So gender fluid, common term when somebody's talking about them being fluid, which like liquid. It can change or shift, right? When you think about water, where you put it, it can kind of change and mold based off of where it is or what environment it's in. And so this identity could be changing or shifting over time, and could actually have some mixed options based off of what's available to that person. But the importance of knowing fluidity is knowing that it's about the person's identity themselves that really makes their ability to identify in this way. And two-spirit. Two-spirit is a word that I actually didn't actually know until I started doing Safe Zone training. And it's an umbrella term used in Native American communities to identify as somebody who qualifies by filling both roles of gender. And so I think it's a pretty cool terminology, but it's a word that encapsulates those in Native American culture. So passing was something Alex brought up in his in the chat. You'll see that passing, which I would say is my husband. My husband is a male passing individual. He's trans, and so when you see him, you would not know that his original sex at birth is female. And so that is what it would be explained as when it comes to passing. So it's a person who has the ability to not, and you would actually not know by their gender expression what they were previously assigned at birth. Queer, I'll say queer is an umbrella term used to identify individuals, but I also will remind ourselves is allow people to use queer on their own. So some people might identify themselves as queer instead of gay or lesbian. Some people might not actually identify themselves as queer at all. They might actually consider it to be offensive. I see queer as a word that the LGBTQ community is taking back to bring power to because it's been used in such negative ways in the past. Transition. So transition is a word I wanted to make sure I put out there because this really affects our transgender community. Transition is when a transgender person starts changing aspects of themselves in many different ways. It doesn't have to be all in one, but it could be their appearance. So they could start dressing the opposite gender, or more masculine, more feminine. They could change their name. They can change their pronouns, which we'll talk a little bit more about, or make physical changes to their body. And so to be more congruent to who they feel on the inside. So the gender identity that they associate with. And then the one squished down at the bottom is coming out. And coming out is a term used when individuals identify with the true aspects of who they are when it comes to their sexuality and their gender identity. It gives individuals a celebration. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But a lot of people who identify with LGBTQIA will always say to you, I have like a coming out story, or I've came out, or I haven't came out. And so I think that's a term that's very well used in the community, mostly in pride, but sometimes actually in sadness as well. Okay. Oh, so actually I didn't ask, but if anybody has any other words that they wanted to, Elizabeth, you shared a new one with us, and thank you so much. And I'm guessing it's N-bi. It's a variation on non-binary, which is awesome. I'm going to make sure I look that up and add that to my list. If you have anything other ones that pop up to you, feel free to put them in the chat. So now that we've built our little vocabulary, I want to talk about some history. And some of this history is new to me. So because I'm continuously learning about the community more and more every day. And so recently I came across a history article that allowed me to understand a little bit more about where our culture has come from. And so in May 1959, in a Cooper Donuts at in LA. It was a little coffee shop that was in between two gay-friendly bars. There was an incident that happened in Los Angeles where a couple of people who identified as Black and brown trans, and actually a gay man and two others were arrested without probable cause for hanging out in this donut shop. And the individuals would go there because it was a gay-friendly place to go. And police officers, because at this time in 1959, it was not okay for you to wear clothing outside of your normal gender or your assigned gender. I shouldn't say normal because it's their assigned gender. At birth. And so it wasn't legal. And so these police officers would come into the establishment and harass the patrons. And they happened to all be of our community. And so they started a riot that night against the police, and this was actually considered the first time, and it's not really highlighted a lot in the history, but it's the first time where LGBT people stood up and wanted to campaign against police brutality in the environment. The second one, which is the most popular one, I would say, popularly shared right now, especially because yesterday was the anniversary, was Stonewall. Stonewall uprising, or Stonewall riots, as you might be, in June 28th, which was yesterday anniversary in 1969. New York police raided Stonewall Inn, which was a gay club in Greenwich Village. And they basically started arresting individuals who happened to identify as transgender for being at the location. That situation caused a huge uproar. It resulted in over 6 days of protesting, all down what's called Christopher Street, and allowed for the LGBT community to step up and say that they weren't going to stand for not being treated fairly and not having the same rights as others. And so this is considered a catalyst for change, but I definitely believe Cooper Donuts riot set the stage for allowing our community, the LGBTQ community, to move forward in continuously fighting the good fight to get equal rights. You'll see in those last two stories that trans people have a large connection to a lot of the fighting. Trans women specifically, drag queens, is some of the history's language. And so I want to kind of move us forward with some more interesting information in history because it's really recent to us. In 2015, June 26th, the Supreme Court struck down all state bans against same-sex marriage. This was an opportunity for the community to celebrate, to be equal, to get the same rights all humans have, to love who they want to love, and celebrate their life with them forever. And so if you hadn't seen this picture of the White House all nice and rainbowed up, this was plastered everywhere and still remains plastered everywhere when it comes to celebrating June 26th, even to this day, which is cool. To bring it back home, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is Pulse. Here, Pulse is a gay nightclub in Orlando, so really close to home to us here at Stetson, right? On the 12th of June in 2006, a man came and took 49 of our community's lives. And there was a massive shooting at this location. This is a picture of the memorial that is at the nightclub now. This was a huge event that I think really demonstrated why it's so important to build awareness, understanding, and connection to this community. When I think specifically about this was considered Latin night at this club that night. It makes me think about intersectionality and how important it is to realize and know that just because I might identify as somebody who's pansexual doesn't mean I'm not a woman, doesn't mean that I'm not somebody who is, and you wouldn't know this from that, but biracial, doesn't mean that your gender identity and how you identify doesn't allow for you to be operating in different communities. And so they can be racial, they can be ethnic, they can be faith background. Religious has a huge connection to this mission to spread awareness as well. And so hate crimes obviously are something that is heartbreaking. Anytime a group of people or one person goes against a group of people, my heart struggles, and I'm sure that's something that we all want to see change, and which is why we're here. And so, Pulse is a great example. It's the reason why we talk about trans visibility, because every single day, and I'll talk a little bit more about statistics of our trans population, people are being harmed every single day, even to today. And one of the statistics I just pulled most recently in 2018, Human Rights Campaign reported that at least 26 deaths of transgender or gender nonconforming people in the US died of fatal violence. Specifically, majority of them were Black transgender women. In 2019, which was just last year, it was reported 27 deaths. Of those 27 deaths, 91% were Black women, 81% under the age of 30, so our young people, and 68% are here in the South, which to me means we still have a lot of work to do. I think I pulled a statistic that said we're already in 2020 at 6 deaths, which to me means there's still a lot of work to do. So June 12th, as I move to maybe another experience here, June 12th, 2020, something more recent to us. It just happened a few weeks ago. Our Affordable Care Act was changed. There's a rule that eliminated protections from discrimination based on gender identity, Section 1557. This has a huge impact on our transgender community. I believe that the rule outlines sex indicator for non-discrimination, and because of the way things are written, your sex is associated to what your sex is at birth and not your gender identity. And so you have to think about, how does that harm the community, right, who doesn't identify with their sex at birth. And then to end it on a positive note when it comes to history, June 15th, I think there's still some work to do here. In 2020, so not even 14 days ago or so, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the Civil Rights Act of 1964 law to prohibit employers from discriminating against workers on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. That's the key, right? Gender identity, a decision that was the first time extends all federal workplace protections to LGBT employees across the nation. This is huge. This is huge, totally huge. There was over 33 states. My numbers could be a little bit off, but of individuals who had fear in their lives of being fired if somebody knew what their identity was. And to me, that should never be the case. So let's move away for some history now that I've paved a little path of understanding some context, and talk maybe a little bit about more of things that you can do today. So microaggressions is a term that we use to talk about offensive comments that can be subtle, or actions that are directed toward a minority group or non-dominant group of people. Often microaggressions are pretty unintentional. Or unconscious, so it's based off of maybe stories that we've learned as individuals, or experiences we've learned as young individuals based off of the stories we were being told about what gender is, specifically focusing on gender here. And then as we get older, we might associate that with them. So a great example here is, oh, you're too pretty to be a lesbian. And that's an assumption that lesbians are butch or masculine, and that you can actually be feminine and be pretty when it comes to looking at somebody who's a lesbian. So you're already associating them with what they should look like. Or, oh, you don't look trans. So I was telling you passing, right? So somebody might identify as transgender, and just because they don't actually look like their sex at birth gender doesn't mean that they can't actually be somebody who is passing or looks the gender they actually feel. It actually helps them feel more connected to who they are when they do. So just a couple of things to help you think a little bit about the language you use. Microaggressions are, I think, when it comes down to the term, really do harm individuals, especially when unintentionally and not addressed. So when thinking about your language, some of the things that I was thinking could be easy, subtle ways to make a shift when it comes to thinking about how to change how we talk. And I have a great example. So my learned behavior is you guys. In high school, I used to use you guys all the time. It was a common way that I would address everybody in the room. When I wanted to bring everybody together, I would say, you guys, everybody come together, you guys, pay attention to me. And I remember a friend of mine saying, you know, I'm not okay with the fact that somebody's calling us guys. We're not guys. And that made me stop and think, well, okay, you're right. The guys term doesn't apply to everybody. It doesn't apply to everybody who might be in the room. So after conversation, I decided to make a commitment to say y'all every time I addressed a group, and I use y'all way too much to the point that I'm from New Jersey, so people in New Jersey immediately say to me, hey, are you from the South? Because I use y'all. But to consider shifting your language about how you greet people or how you connect people to be more gender inclusive, I think is a great way to talk about being more inclusive and being supportive of the community that you're in front of or you're talking to. So good morning, folks, is a great example. Hi, everyone. Can I get you all something? Thanks, friends. All of those things are great things, great words to be able to use to address individuals, regardless of what their identity is. So another thing, when I introduced myself, I shared with you my pronouns. Elizabeth also did an awesome job in sharing their pronouns as well. So you'll hear that have some examples. So we were taught when we were younger, most of us, to think about pronouns in binary. So it has to be one or the other, that there's nothing that exists in between. And when we think about identity, that's not true. There isn't just male or female. Sometimes somebody who identifies as male might actually show feminine characteristics, and somebody who identifies as female might show masculine characteristics. And so each of us might identify not what people assume we should. So we use pronouns to help us know what the other person would like us to call them or use. And so awareness of that gender identity and expression, because it has grown, has allowed for us to have so many different pronouns. And I'm going to show a chart next to give you an example of how they lay out and the differences in the pronouns when it comes to different stuff. And actually, these 5 I'm showing you here, so he, she, they, Z, and A, there's more. These pronouns are just, I think, the general pronouns you would potentially see in the community, but there's so many more, which is why you have to ask. You have to ask individuals what pronouns they use so that they have control of how you gender them. So unintentionally, a microaggression could be misgendering somebody. So somebody who actually presents as female, but uses he and him, you wouldn't have known that unless you asked. And by asking, you then save them a lot of heartache and sometimes some re-questioning about who they are and how they show up in the world. And for years, because we've lived in this like gender is based on sex environment, we have taught ourselves only these opposites. And so what you can look at is that in perfectly harmless environments, if you say, how can I ask you, what are your pronouns? What pronouns do you use? You give the opportunity for the person to empower themselves and share who they are. So I have an example here. So my name is Jessica. I use she, her, hers pronouns. What pronouns do you use? So I want to give everybody an opportunity to share what pronouns they use in this group chat. And by using these pronouns, you are going to perfectly prevent harm to those who identify as trans, gender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, gender queer, and you allow yourself to not exclude or isolate them. So I have this cool chart here, and this is just a taste. This is not everything. Thanks, Lua. Yeah, thanks, everybody. This is just a taste. So I'm using 4 options here. So he, him, his. So he studied, I called, his pencil. One of the examples that I'd like to give to you as something I do personally is maybe I have no knowledge of a person I'm emailing with. I might want to communicate with them. I know that the most inclusive way I can be is to actually use they. Thanks, Alex. Is to use they, because it does not allow me to identify them in any specific gender. And so to be respectful and create an inclusive place, I might actually, if I have knowledge of a person's gender in any way, and I haven't asked them their pronouns or hadn't had an opportunity, I would use they, them, and their. So they studied, or I called them, or their pencil, that's theirs, which is a common word we use all the time. And when it comes to in sentences, we're so used to sometimes just using a person's he or she in our language that sometimes even replacing it just with their name is fine. And so being really thoughtful about either asking for pronouns, so introducing yourself, sharing your pronouns, and asking them theirs, or saying, hey, you know, I didn't get a chance before you use he, she, or they, or z, or a. Before you use those, asking, hey, I actually didn't get a chance to ask you your pronouns. Could you tell me what pronouns you use, right? So really rethinking how you show up in the environment just as a start of conversation makes a huge difference to all individuals, not just this community. So I talked a little bit about why I think it's so important for us to look at some statistics when it comes to the community and the real purpose behind Safe Zone and why it is important to be a good an ally. So I think about the youth, because the youth are really going to be shifting who our world is. And the best way for me to think about the youth is to think about numbers. HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, does great data. They have this survey, and I'm just going to look at my notes here to make sure. It's called Growing Up LGBT in America. They survey 10,000 LGBT youth from 13 to 17 for these surveys. So that's a really big population, I would say a pretty decent population to look at. And this is just a stark taste of what difficulties they're facing. So 4 in 10 LGBT youth, 42%, say the community in which they live in is not accepting of LGBT. So why are we doing this? This is why. Our youth need us, right? Our youth need us to figure out how to manage this world, this sucky world, you know, the things that happen, to be resilient. And so in order for them to be resilient, having a foundation of community is always key. So let's see, I have another one here for you. 26% of LGBT youth say that their biggest problems are not feeling accepted by their family, trouble at school / bullying, fear of being out or open. 22% of non-LGBT youth say that their biggest problems are trouble with class, exams, and grades. Wow, in comparison, that's crazy. So you're telling me a person who doesn't identify as LGBT only has to worry about how they're doing in school. But if you're LGBT, so if you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, asexual, intersex is the I, if you identify or are even questioning that you can identify, you're dealing with family issues, potentially bullying, fear, and not even worrying about classes. How, you know, we want our kids to be just focused on trouble in their classes, skipping class or missing an exam or not doing well on a grade, but not having these basic functions of life, right? Things that help build our core as human beings as a challenge to them. Another reason why we should do this work. Let's see here. So another statistic from that survey, LGBT youth out of their immediate families are more likely to report being happy than those who are not out. So when I talked about coming out, I was going to actually put a song here because it's always a great tune to play. But this is huge. So when kids feel they have the ability to share with their immediate family who they are, who they're feeling on the inside, who they want to be on the outside, they are more likely to be happy. Who doesn't want to be happy, right? I want to be happy. I know that's for sure. And it's hard enough in this world trying to figure out how to be happy with having this layer of it on us. So some things I think are cool to potentially share when it comes to celebrating. And I talked about support, right? Looking at support in different ways is some of these celebrations. So March 31st, International Transgender Day of Visibility. The April 26th, 40 to None Day, I actually had to look this up because I couldn't remember what it meant. But this is a day to raise public awareness of LGBT youth homelessness. I didn't put that statistic in here, but there is a huge number of, there's a large percentage of LGBT youth who are homeless, even here in Florida, because their parents weren't accepting of them or whoever their guardians might have been who provided them a roof over their head. June is Pride Month. If we're in it right now, that's what we're celebrating. The entire month is an opportunity to show rainbow pride, excitement, and love for one another. June 28th, I talked about the Stonewall Uprising. It's an anniversary, definitely something I feel like is most celebrated during Pride Month because it is an opportunity for us to show our appreciation for the people who paved the way for what we already have now, or what we still need, that's for sure. October is History Month. The October 11th, which is the same every year, it's always the 11th, is National Coming Out Day. Stetson does an event on this day where our Kaleidoscope group puts a door and allows people to come out right here on campus. It's so cool. They have this cool white door. It's painted in rainbow, and it gives an opportunity to come out in different ways, whether they have before or they just want to on that day. November 20th, Transgender Day of Remembrance. I can't tell you how many individuals, and I shared some numbers with you before about how many individuals have been affected because of violence to the transgender community. So this is an opportunity for us to pause and think about them and take a moment to reflect on how we need to shift and change the world specifically for the transgender community. And World AIDS Day, obviously one of the things that is most important when it comes to thinking about history is focusing specifically on HIV and AIDS education in this community. Come on. My computer keeps freezing. Next slide. Uh-oh. Oops, boop, back. There you go. Okay, so I'm wrapping it up here. I want to provide some resources. So if you're a Stetson student, we have multiple resources, and even actually if you're alumni, you feel free to reach out to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Here on campus, they're located in the Cross-Cultural Center. Kaleidoscope, or K-Scope, is the student organization that hosts events specifically around LGBTQ issues and celebrations. Student counseling services and health services provide resources that are gender inclusive, and so great resources to be able to utilize here on campus. Local resources here in DeLand and maybe a little bit outside of DeLand, Collective Cares, the GLBT Center of Orlando, Zebra Coalition, PFLAG in New Smyrna, and PFLAG in Orlando. Great local organizations to connect with. And then national. One of the things I love about resources nowadays, they're right online. So if you were to type into Google GLSEN, you could find abundance of resources specifically around what we talked about today and more. GLAD as well. Human Rights Campaign, I encourage you to go in and look at some more of that data and see how this community is being impacted. There's several different other resources that they've used based off of their research that could be really mind-blowing. The Trevor Project and Lambda Legal. So as I kind of wrap us up, be the verb. So I talked about being an ally and being the verb. Allies want to learn, which is something you did today. Hopefully you've learned something new or something different. Allies address their own barriers. So thinking internally about how you connect with the community, maybe your stories, the stories you've grown up in, or the stories you have now. Allies are people who know that support comes in many forms. So whether you decide to change how you use your language and make it more gender inclusive, start a conversation by introducing yourself with pronouns, or continuing to figure out how to celebrate one of those special days or months, you definitely can show support. And remember that allies are diverse. It doesn't matter how you show up to be an ally as long as you're taking some time to make change. So just a reminder, I am a Safe Zones facilitator. So this session was sponsored by Safe Zone Facilitators and the Alumni Association, and our commitment to improving the visibility and support for the LGBTQ community.